Welcome to the program, everyone, and really privileged today to welcome to the show two gentlemen from the firm Odgers Berndtson, which is a high-level recruiting company focused in the tech area. They also go into other areas, but they're very well known for their tech practice. And I welcome Tim Sleep, who's the MD for Australia and New Zealand, and Sean Garvey, who is the partner for the technology practice in Australia and New Zealand. So, guys, welcome to the show.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having us.
Great to have you here. And I think very timely. You guys recently published this report, Technology Sector MD Insights, the opportunities and the challenges of the crisis. How is it affecting our businesses? And I think all of us individually have got some part of this story, and we've got our own experience. But we don't really get the full picture of what's going on, and we're isolated as well. And I just thought this was excellent that you guys have gone out and done a study of what's happening in the technology sector. So can you tell me a bit about the study, the scope of it?
Sure, yeah. I mean, so we speak to a lot of technology sector managing directors, either for Australian headquartered companies or multinationals, where the local MD looks after the region, Australia and New Zealand. And it's been an incredible 6 months for them. Most of them run sales or customer facing teams. And we've noticed, and they've noticed, both customer behavior changing dramatically, but also how they've led their sales teams to be successful or to adapt to the new environment. Quite often in group scenarios, they'll be a little bit guarded about what it is that they say. So under the condition of anonymity, we spoke to 50 of them between Sean and I individually, and published the key themes and thoughts and things we thought was the best practice of how these companies were adapting.
Yeah, and we wanted to get not only their opinion, but also some hard quantitative data. So we did follow up with a survey monkey of relatively straightforward questions, but asking them to measure business through the numbers. So we've got a report that has their qualitative impressions of what they're seeing personally, and then quantitatively, and we drew together the themes across that, which actually were very, very similar right across the tech sector, irrespective of the product category. There were differences, but there were definitely a lot of similarities.
No, and I really appreciate that about the report. Yeah, you've got some data, and then you've got a lot of quotes, and what's really going on. So we get a great picture there. So Tim, you mentioned folks being guarded, especially in the group situation. So how did you find folks when you were asking them these questions? Because country managers, sales leaders generally put on a brave face.
They do.
Were you able to sort of crack that and get underneath?
Well, I think we were. And, first of all, there's very few country MDs are being given relief on the numbers they're being asked to deliver. So in certain instances, the technology that you sell has increased in its relevance, or it certainly did when the pandemic first hit and we all had to start working from home back in March, April. So if you're in cyber or communications or risk management software, then your sales went through the roof. Similarly, if you were very, very close to government and you were very close to stuff that they had to do to respond to the situation as quickly as possible, then you're in a good position, both from a sort of software vendor, but also a IT services perspective. Yes. So that was definitely a key theme that came through. But I think as time's gone on, the sales leaders and the country MDs have become increasingly worried about how on earth do they hit their numbers next year? How do they generate, new pipeline? How do they build new relationships? How do they motivate the sales teams? What's happening to the culture? So we did get a lot of raw honesty as we spoke to many of these MDs.
Yeah, and look, these are busy guys. We spoke to people leading some of the top global brand names, and also those in smaller and mid-sized companies. So it was quite a range. But I think one of my takeaways from the personal discussions was there was as much curiosity in finding out what others were doing. So I think the desire to contribute was almost like reciprocally, this is a great initiative because actually we'll get some answers to the burning questions. And I found myself interviewing, country MDs for the paper, but actually at the end of it, spending 20 minutes asking their questions, answering their questions. So I think there's a shared camaraderie in the industry. So we hoped that the answers they'd given weren't necessarily wind and bluster. They were genuine and honest and anonymous as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you're saying they're now getting a bit worried, thinking about the future. The budgets aren't going away, but maybe the excuses will be going away and there'll be less tolerance for not making the number going forward. Would that be right?
Well, I mean, if they do, I don't think it's specific to the Australian market.
No.
Although internal borders and external borders, having been pretty much shut for the majority of the last 6 months, certainly isn't helping. But I think this is the struggle with generating new business and new relationships is a global one for any organisation where their sales teams have been forced to work from home.
Yeah. Okay. One of the first sections in the report's about the customer. And that's where you start. So what were some of the observations there?
It did vary. I think that some of the themes were that government, both state and federal, were making decisions quicker than they've ever made decisions before. So it reinforced the need to be close to government and to have both relationships, but also products and solutions that are relevant to what the government needed to do and do need to do. On the other end of the spectrum, financial services, which is probably the other mega sector in Australia in terms of need for technology and embracing technology as sort of first movers, were a bit slower. So whilst the projects were still going ahead that were already in plan or sort of in place before COVID, the decision maker was slower. It perhaps took 2 or 3 board meetings, not one, to get large capex and opex decisions through. So financial services slower, government quicker was one of the themes. Yeah,
very good. So anything else from there, Sean, on the customer side?
Yeah, I think the really smart vendors took this as an opportunity to take their customer relationship to another level. It's that, in the trenches together, a camaraderie, we will waive, fees and we'll be more accommodating on costs. There were, however, actually a smaller group, which I'm pleased to say, which were very, very dogmatic that it was all about their personal, budgets, and that any relief to the customer was not getting signed off at the US level. So, I would say there's those really smart vendors will come out of this experience with embedded customer relationships, and people have got long memories. They remember those that waived contractual constraints for the benefit of the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
And final point on that. I mean, mid-market, the smaller customers stopped all discretionary spend because they were more focused on cash flow. That was a big theme that came through. And then obviously certain sectors, airline, tourism, travel, and entertainment, really struggling as well. So not a huge amount of spend or discretionary spend was continued in those sectors.
Yeah, it's been very sector specific, and every sector's had an impact. Some very positive, some very negative, some ticking along, and like government, like you mentioned, has been going very well, and it's a huge part of the economy and a huge part of the technology spend here. So any swing vendors can do towards government, I really have been recommending that to a few clients already. All right, very good. So let's get to how teams are managing their sales activity. Being remote now. So what are you doing there?
We asked this question, which was, how do you balance underperformers versus underperformance? And the underperformers might be the guys and the girls who are very capable pre-COVID, and all of a sudden they've seen their numbers fall off a cliff, versus an underperformer who just hasn't got skills and capability. I expected to see what you might call a much more empathetic approach to underperformance. To underperformers. Okay. But the consistent theme, certainly within the bigger vendors, was that, look, we've got very rigorous frameworks and controls and very detailed plans, and we've got a methodology. we might be a little bit more forgiving in a pandemic environment. So if we had someone focus on airlines, we might be more forgiving because of that. But if someone's an underperformer, they'll probably underperformer pre-COVID, probably still an underperformer post-COVID. So whilst the performance management frameworks didn't change massively, I think people did have a little bit more empathy, but still they've got a business to run, and there's still, as we've seen, there were deals to be done out there in the market, and certain sectors were spending adequately.
Yes, yeah, I think I've seen definitely maybe underperformance was being tolerated a little bit more when things were booming, and just having a warm body in the seat was good enough, but that's really being exposed in this situation, and folks that hadn't moved on that have really got a problem now, and there's some moral, I see some sales leaders saying they don't want to let people go in this situation in a pandemic too, right?
That's right. Yeah, I think that the first and foremost, and this isn't specific to technology, all organizations, large well, actually, all organizations, first and foremost, they wanted to make sure that their employees were safe and well and were able to continue with their work. So we did see some grants for work for home, setting yourself up well in working from home. We've seen the mental health debate become far more mainstream, and that's something that's part of the weekly cadence in most tech companies. So talking about that, checking in with your colleagues, and making sure that they're okay. So that's where the empathy thing really came in for the first 2 or 3 months, and then it's around expectations of, okay, well, what are we expecting you to do in terms of all the sales disciplines that we ordinarily expect you to do, number of meetings, what's your pipeline cover for your quarterly or monthly budget and everything else. So gradually, as people have been sort of comfortable their team are okay and have adapted to managing remotely, then it's back to, okay, well, how are you performing? The interesting thing is there was quite a few leaders who said that we've had previous top performers really struggle to adapt. So how do you wrap your arms around them and say, well, you're great at your job, you're just not great at your job remotely, and spending some time just readdressing those sorts of things. And
I think there was also it didn't really cover the scope of our questions, but there was a self-reflecting theme that came through, at least in my discussions, where we go through the cycle of the March, April, May, June, which was the old panic and transition into coming out the other side as we sort of changed month to month, where leaders were communicating daily and 3 or 4 layers down the organization, and that becomes or creates a sense of fatigue, I think, not only in them but also in their teams. And it was commented on a couple of times that whilst communication in the early days was very essential, actually just backing off a little bit and giving people more oxygen and giving some time to breathe was probably required in some settings.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And you did sort of cover mental health as well a bit in the report. So that's not normally something that comes through from country managers and sales leaders, but it seems more part of the conversation now.
It does, and the encouraging thing and the interesting thing is it's mainstream. If you are struggling, then go and see someone about it in the same way as you would if you've got a cut in your arm or a cold type thing. So it's that's been a very positive thing, and there has been a focus on mental health. There's also been a focus though on taking your mind off work. How can we break the routine? How can we break the routine of working from home? And for the first 2 or 3 weeks, the end of week trivias or the end of week drinks was all quite novel, and I think we were probably doing this at weekends with our friends as well as our colleagues. And that then moved very quickly to, okay, well, how can we get an entertainer in, be it a comedian or let's have a game of bingo. Let's send some cheese and wine to everyone's home and have a cheese and wine tasting evening, or let's get an inspirational speaker. So that was done to varying degrees. I mean, the big global tech companies were getting global superstars in to address them and have global all hands meetings, but a lot of the entertainment industry did did adapt to saying, well, you know, can I help for an hour? And that's how I'm now going to make my money, by giving your team a bit of a break and a bit of a laugh and a bit of a, you know, something different, nothing to do with work whatsoever. So
Yes.
that's gone down very, very well, and I think that's another thing that continues to evolve.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, coming back to the sales activity, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into that. So I think anecdotally, a lot of companies struggling with generating pipeline for the next couple of quarters. What did you guys find?
Yeah, well, the actual number that we got through the Survey Monkey was, 85% of all companies surveyed were worried about their pipeline over this, quarter as we go into Christmas. So, the results were compiled probably three or 4 weeks ago. So that's very, very current. So I think many organizations have seen a significant uptick in sales, but we're very worried in developing new pipeline. And, I think and Tim, I'm interested in your thoughts as well, but one of the things that became very prevalent for us is that if you have strong existing relationships, you've probably done quite well during the pandemic, but building brand new relationships remotely. I mean, we asked all sorts of, looking for ideas, what's the most innovative thing you've done? And look, there were some interesting ideas, but the bottom line is no one's cracked it. It's still an anathema in many ways.
Yeah, I think there were some things though that some leaders thought worked better. So the most senior executive relationships were easier to maintain and grow because you didn't have to fly around the region or the various states to close the biggest deal of the quarter. So executives were found to be more accessible. So there was definitely huge efficiencies there. The other thing that was now fully accepted by customers is what many leaders call the hybrid meeting. So you could pick your global expert in a product or a sector, and rather than force them to fly to Brisbane or Perth to show that you really, really cared about the customer, which is quite often what the customer expected, it's now perfectly acceptable to say, well, you join the meeting from San Francisco or Waldorf or wherever you are, and we'll have our local account team there, plus we'll have the country MD there. So you can have all the local executive, the global experts, and the local account team sometimes in the room in a sort of hybrid way. And the content and the value you deliver in those meetings is obviously a lot more efficient, but also greater than it was and more possible than it was before. So that was a real breakthrough, which I don't think is going to change as we go forward. I think people are going to maintain those sorts of benefits to the new environment.
Yeah, there were examples of little tactics people are starting to finesse where, if you've got the sales rep and maybe a sales engineer on the call, and the sales engineer wants to make a point and dive in, they may lean forward or scratch their nose or do something that signals that they've pre-agreed before the meeting, which is very, very hard to do when you're sort of face to face with the customer, or they could tap out notes on the keyboard. So these little tactics that I think people have come up with that are finessing the Zoom world. But I think the takeaway is is sitting down in a coffee shop and developing empathy and rapport with someone you don't know face to face better than doing it on Zoom, then probably the answer at this point is no.
So pretty consistently, I think you're saying existing relationships we could maintain and do okay with those if we had them before, but building new ones has been challenging. No one's really cracked the code. They're trying a few innovative ways of doing that, but it's quite challenging.
The interesting thing at the moment, Steve, is that there's many technology companies that are able to see the customer. I mean, thankfully, certainly in New South Wales, but increasingly for the rest of Australia as well, including Victoria, COVID is manageable or deemed to be manageable with caution. And some leaders are saying, well, go and see your customer. If the customer's happy to see you, go and see them, be that in their suburb or for a coffee or in our offices or in their offices. Whereas other technology companies have had a mandate from their headquarters to say, under no circumstances is anyone to go anywhere near an office or to go and see a customer. And sometimes you're in a position where your competition are able to go and do the face-to-face interaction where they deem that's advantageous, and others have got their hands tied and saying, well, we're not allowed. It is against our corporate policy. And there's been some leaders that have joined organizations in May, April, June that haven't met any of their colleagues at all because they're not allowed to see colleagues. So I think the local autonomy to respond to government advice and restrictions and to do what your customers feel comfortable is very, very varied, which is interesting.
Yeah, I love that anecdote. With one of the participants was in New Zealand, and he said on the weekend, I went for dinner with friends, and then we went out to a rugby game, and then we went, for more beers around the pub afterwards. And but on Monday, under no circumstances can I go to the office. So it's this sort of extreme policy versus reality on the ground, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right, so we talked a lot about sales, and let's talk about the management and the sales management. And you've got a section in here called "Death of the Hero Leader." Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, look, we do these white papers probably every 2 years, and I think part of it is to take a pulse check on the industry, see if they're continuing trends, and to draw out themes that might be, might not change on a quarter by quarter, but might change, annually or biannually.
Yep.
And the hero leader theme is probably now in its fifth, sixth year, and I think what we were trying to get a sense of is the old school approach, which is, command and control, bang the table, stand up, go over the top, go with the troops, you're the hero, you're in the limelight, look at me, it was still certainly there a couple of years ago, but I think observations through COVID and actually more recently, we're starting to see this level of authenticity and empathy, and leaders who have deep listening skills and have high emotional intelligence are starting to win through, whereas the bluster and the wind that you might get of the hero leader banging the chest and banging the table is definitely been on the decline. But I think this has been an accelerated decline, and that would certainly one or two leaders who might not necessarily put themselves in that category were saying, actually, I was close to that category, and I've now had to really adapt and become much more, empathetic to my staff in a way that I probably was uncomfortable for them. And that was 20 or 30% of the people were talking in that vein.
So what are the elements of an effective leader today, you think?
I think that employees expect a leader to drive a common purpose. I mean, authenticity and transparency is obviously important. And then focusing on the lead indicators, making sure everyone's very, very clear on what the expectations are, and doing that every single day, getting into the habits, and trusting and empowering their staff. So that sounds like a lot of buzzword bingo. But if you get all the lead indicators right, then you're far more likely to deliver predictable, sustainable monthly and quarterly results. So I think that the ability to focus not just on the current quarter, but beyond that, but more importantly, to get that discretionary 20% from your team and your teams means motivating and inspiring in a very different way than perhaps was the case 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still no lack of accountability.
No,
or performance,
there isn't.
Right?
There isn't. No, I mean, they're not. The
some people made mistake.
Mistake.
The death of the hero leader means there's not a focus on performance, but there still has to be. But you do it in a more holistic way, and like you say, not just short term. Because I think I have in mind the hero leader. They're just banging on about current quarter, current deals, do what it takes, whatever it takes to push the deal, and we know that spoils customer relationships. And
there's this, I suppose, this theme that we put through into the conclusion, which was, leaders thinking they should have all the answers when this is unprecedented. We've never been through it. There's no benchmark. There's no global study. It's actually admitting, you know what, I don't have the answer, and we have to be comfortable with that ambiguity. I think that was one of the conclusions that we made. Was if we were one takeaway to the report is, hey guys, be comfortable. Don't cover it up. If you haven't got the answer, you haven't got the answer. And actually your teams would respect you for being honest and transparent in that way, because why would you have the answer? You haven't been through this before.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that authenticity, looking forward, getting people on board, and embracing things. We talked about mental health, and you've got to be on board with a lot of these new trends that are emerging as well.
And let's not forget as well, Steve, that of all the sectors you'd like to be working in right now, technology is still probably up
pretty
there.
good.
Most customers are becoming technology companies in their own right. Retailers are all embracing multi-channel retailing more than ever. Banks are all effectively becoming technology companies. So helping your customers where they want to be helped and where they've got the propensity to take some risks and try and take advantage of the crisis is a pretty privileged place to be. So by and large, people working in the tech sector are pretty happy where they are. It's just making sure that they can be as relevant to their customers as possible through whatever means every day.
Yeah, and 42% of all respondents, bearing in mind these are some of the contain some of the largest employers in the tech sector, 42% said they will be increasing their headcount in the next 6 months. Close to 10% said they'd be significantly increasing their headcount in the next 6 months. So I think underlying what we might see is a pandemic, the downturn in the economy, actually in some ways is still feeding a healthy growth in the technology sector.
Yeah, it's a good lead indicator. Like, do you think the tech companies will continue on this path of having their growth being headcount driven, or will there be more of a focus on productivity?
I think both. I mean, it's long been the case that to hit increased revenue targets, the only lever you have to pull as a local subsidiary of a multinational is headcount. Throw more headcount at it, and that's the best way we've got of hitting revenues. But I think that the tools that all sales leaders and managing directors have got at their disposal now of how to manage productivity should be done in alongside the headcount versus revenue debate. Yeah,
absolutely. All right, so let's talk about, you've got in here some ideas, some of the best ideas that you've collected in the survey. So maybe you could share a few of those ideas with us.
I think we've covered a lot of them so far already, but I think what can you focus on that isn't the day-to-day and the week-to-week and the month-to-month grind around business? So making sure that you've got a proactive and explicit mental health program is important. Making sure that in the absence of being able to do staff entertainment together, that you try and replicate that and make it not about business in terms of the sort of guest speakers and activities that you do remotely is important. I think checking in with your staff more generally is important. Lots of leaders have said, well, it used to be a forecast call once a week. Now we check in 3 times a week. One of them's a forecast call. One of them's a check-in. What are you doing? Yes. What's going on? And one of them is about a third thing. The other thing is make sure your staff are set up to work from home. So really understanding their personal situations. Do they have flatmates that they live with? Do they live with elderly parents? What ages are their children? Are they doing homeschooling? So really understanding their personal home situation as well. I think an interesting stat is 90% of everyone that we spoke to felt that motivation was declining, and culture. So those two things, motivation and culture, is gradually declining. So thinking of ways to really focus on that will lead to productivity, and obviously then results and relevance to customer as well.
Wow, what a great list. Sean, any comment or any addition?
Yeah, look, I think I'd echo Tim's view. I think I'm seeing this as an observer of the industry in definitive stages. It's the crisis, it's the normalization, and then it's the recovery. I think for me, I've seen definite fatigue come into play, where people are feeling that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, that includes Sydney-siders as well as Victorians. I think objectively, leadership, the hard work's just beginning. So the ones that were seem to be doing well at actually taking away energy and enthusiasm by stabilizing their team, building their pipeline. And actually, this is a real opportunity for the tech sector to come out strongly, and good leadership will shine through. I think there's always a situation in the tech industry where people focus on leadership performance. They may exit a country manager based on pipeline or deals made. I think if that case can't be built for obvious reasons, then you need to look at the quality of the leadership, how they galvanize team spirit, how they create culture, how they build in safe place to work and build in diversity into their strategy. Those leaders who are thinking holistically outside of just pipeline seem to be their organizations, it's correlation, not causation, but the correlation in the numbers that we saw was they seem to be doing better.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the final points for me, Steve, is that the sales executives and the first level sales managers and second level sales managers should also give their leaders a bit of slack as well. And they're struggling, right. They're doing it tough. They, as Sean said before, they haven't got all the answers at all. And I met someone yesterday who's a country MD of a multinational. It happens to be under private equity ownership, but he'd literally just been given the news that globally they would be shutting down all their offices and asking staff to work permanently from home. And again, that decision was made without consultation, at least down to the sort of country MD here. And he said to me, Tim, I'm out. I can't lead a team of 80, 90 people, 80, 90 salespeople if we're being asked to do that remotely full time. And therefore, on that basis, I need to go and work for another organization that's more trusting and empowering of what the local needs are. So I think everything we've said about the sales teams, the sales leaders are struggling for answers and trying to do the best they can as well. So yes. Giving them some slack is important too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. That's a great point. I just wonder if you have some thoughts on what things will look like going into 2021. Do you have thoughts on how much of this change that we've been through sticks?
Depends on who you are.
Does a rubber band go back to being fully in the field and traveling every week, or what do you think it looks like?
Myself and Tim took the opportunity to host a roundtable of we're obviously limited to 10 people in a private dining. We haven't done that for a long time. Again, we had a range of vendors. We actually had a couple of CIOs there, and we had a futurist. And we had this, we were debating the white paper between us, and some of the people in that room were participants, and they were interested to share their ideas between two people who were interviewed for the paper. And I think as we went through, by nature, that room are a bunch of optimists, and we're feeling quite good about ourselves, and we're coming out of the pandemic, and everyone's not quite doing high fives. And then the futurists that we'd invited said, I just wanted you to consider these 9 things, and when someone starts to say 9 things, that they've done some research and detailed. And he basically reeled off all the economic drivers, everything from mortgage default rates to credit card debt, right through to the JobKeeper and job seeker relief, and the list went on, basically saying that from around March next year, then we've got significant challenges ahead. Now, he wasn't applying that to the tech sector specifically, but I think his message and takeaway was it's too early to be optimistic until things like vaccines come through and business confidence returns. We've got some choppy waters in front of us. So that certainly did put a slight downer on the end of the evening, but again, it was quite good to get a balanced, realistic view from someone who spends his time analyzing data and looking at the future.
Yeah. So expect a subdued environment for some time. Don't expect this V-shaped recovery. Be great if it comes, but we think we have to count on definitely some more roadblocks and, like you say, choppy water. Yeah. All right, guys, it's been a great discussion. I just wonder if you have any final thoughts or anything we've missed earlier in the discussion that you'd like to share.
No, I think what we're discussing today will be out of date pretty soon. The thinking is evolving so quickly in terms of the economic outlook, the domestic outlook, the return to office or not return to office, culture, motivation, the winners and the losers. So I think the more that we can, collaborate, be open, be vulnerable, learn from each other, the better, because the debate has shifted so far in the last sort of even two months, and it would have done again by Christmas, I'm sure.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Very good. All right, guys. Well, really appreciate this discussion. I'm sure the audience would have gotten a lot out of that, as I did. When I read this report, I thought, wow, this is awesome. This is a lot of what I'm seeing, but it really confirms some things that I was seeing already. So I think everyone will get a lot out of it. So please go check the report. We'll link to it in the show notes as well. So thanks again, guys, for participating, and thanks everyone for watching and listening. And we'll talk to you all soon. Bye for now.
Great.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Chat soon.